Imagine this, a young boy, sitting quietly in the back of his classroom, pencil in hand, sketching away in his notebook. It seems innocent enough, right? Just another student passing time, doodling here and there. But what if I told you that this very boy, mocked for his drawings and dismissed by his classmates, was on the verge of something that would change his life forever? It all started with a simple piece of paper, a few strokes of a pencil, and a dream he kept hidden from the world. Everyone laughed at him, ridiculed his work, and thought nothing of his art. But deep down, something inside him refused to give up. Now, as you're reading this, you might be wondering, what could possibly happen to someone who is bullied for something as harmless as drawing? Stick with me, because in just a moment, everything is about to make sense. By the end of this video, you'll understand why it's so important to never give up on your passion, no matter how much the world tries to knock you down. So, who is this boy, and what was it that everyone missed? His name is Ethan, a 15-year-old high school student whose love for art was often treated as a joke by his peers. In fact, it wasn't just the kids who didn't get it. His teachers, too, dismissed his work as nothing more than childish scribbles. You've probably been there before, right? The feeling of having something inside of you, a passion or a talent, but no one around you recognizes it. Or worse, they make you feel like it's not even worth pursuing. The people around Ethan called him everything from a daydreamer to a wannabe artist, and he spent day after day trying to ignore the mockery and continue doing what he loved. But it wasn't easy. Being a teenager is hard enough, let alone when your every move is scrutinized and your dreams are laughed at. Ethan wasn't alone in feeling like an outsider, but his story was different. And trust me, you're going to want to hear what happened next. Now, before you jump to any conclusions, I'll tell you this. Ethan's story is about more than just overcoming mockery. It's about something deeper. It's about staying true to yourself when the world around you doesn't understand. It's about holding on to hope, even when you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's about finding your purpose, even when everyone else says it's a waste of time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I promise, by the time we get to the end of this story, you'll feel like you've been on an emotional roller coaster, rooting for Ethan as if he were your own best friend. So, stay with me, because we're just getting started. It was a typical Tuesday morning, just like any other. Ethan was sitting at his desk, eyes fixed on the notebook in front of him. The teacher was going over math problems, but his mind was elsewhere. He didn't care about math. What he cared about was his art. He drew on the pages of his notebook, sketching lines, curves, and shapes that no one else seemed to notice. But today was different. Today, for the first time, someone noticed. Someone who wasn't just mocking him. Someone who saw potential where others saw only a waste of time. I want you to imagine this moment. Picture yourself in Ethan's shoes, your classmates giggling behind your back, your teacher barely acknowledging your existence, and every time you pick up your pencil, you feel the weight of doubt pushing you down. Now, in the middle of all that, someone, just one person, comes up to you and says, "Hey, I see what you're doing. I think you've got something special." That was the moment Ethan had been waiting for, but the question remains, who is this person, and what did they see in his art? Hold that thought. In just a moment, everything will become clear. But I need you to stay with me, because the twist in this story isn't just surprising, it's inspiring. As you're watching this, you might be thinking, that sounds like a nice story, but what does it really have to do with me? Well, here's where things get personal. Ethan's journey could be yours. Maybe you've been the person who feels unnoticed, like your hard work goes unappreciated. Maybe you've been the one pouring your soul into something, but no one seems to care. And just like Ethan, maybe you've doubted whether your passion is worth pursuing. But here's what I want you to understand. This story is about more than just Ethan's victory. It's about your potential. It's about your ability to turn the very thing the world dismisses into something extraordinary. This story is going to take you places. It's going to challenge you to think differently about your own dreams, your own challenges, and your own purpose. But right now, I need you to focus on Ethan's turning point. Because what happens next in this video will leave you speechless, and I promise, you'll never look at drawing or dreaming big the same way again. But let's rewind for a second. Ethan wasn't just facing ridicule from his classmates. he was also fighting an internal battle. He questioned himself constantly. Should he keep drawing? Was it worth it? Could he ever make something of himself as an artist when everyone told him it was pointless? The doubts were real, and they gnawed at him every day. Yet, in the quiet moments when he was alone, his passion for art burned bright. He didn't want to be the kid who just accepted the mockery. He wanted to prove something to himself, to his classmates, to the world. And then came the unexpected. Ethan's life was about to change forever, and it all started with an opportunity he almost didn't take. One day, a flyer was passed around the school. A national art contest. The grand prize? A scholarship to a prestigious art school, along with the chance to have your artwork displayed for the world to see. Ethan's heart raced as he stared at the flyer. For a moment, the doubts crept back in. Who am I to enter something like this, he thought. But then something inside him clicked. This was his chance. This was his moment to prove to himself that he had what it took. But, of course, it wasn't going to be that easy. Remember, no one believed in Ethan, not his classmates, not his teachers, and at that moment, not even himself. But he entered anyway. He worked day and night, perfecting his piece, putting everything he had into it. He was determined. But would it be enough? The clock was ticking. The contest deadline was looming, and with it, the looming question, would Ethan's passion be enough to turn the tide? You probably think you know where this is going, but trust me, you're not prepared for the shocking twist that's about to unfold. Hold on, because just when you think the story is over, it's only beginning. So, stay tuned, because in the next part of this video, I'm going to reveal how Ethan's journey ended up in a place no one ever saw coming. This isn't just a story about overcoming obstacles. It's about changing your life when everyone doubts you. It's about finding the courage to chase your dreams, even when you feel like the world is laughing at you. Keep watching, because the next chapter will blow your mind. The days leading up to the art contest were both exciting and nerve-wracking for Ethan. As the deadline approached, he found himself spending countless late nights in his room, hunched over his sketchbook, immersed in his work. His parents, who were supportive but always busy with their own lives, never quite understood the level of dedication Ethan had for his art. They saw it as a hobby, something to pass the time, but not something that would lead anywhere serious. His father, especially, was focused on practical pursuits, sports, good grades, and a future in business. Ethan's mother was kinder, but she, too, couldn't shake the feeling that art might not be a real career. She was always the one to remind him that a hobby could remain just that, a passion, but nothing more. Ethan's school life didn't provide much refuge either. Though he had a small group of friends, they often teased him for being too serious about his art. Most of his classmates didn't understand why he spent so much time drawing instead of hanging out or participating in extracurricular activities. He had no desire to be like them, to blend in with the crowd. But this feeling of isolation started to wear on him. He found himself questioning his place in the world, wondering if there was any merit to his dreams, or if he was just setting himself up for disappointment. The art contest, however, was his chance to prove to himself that his efforts weren't in vain. If he could just win, if he could show everyone that his art had real value, maybe he could finally silence the doubts that plagued him. But Ethan wasn't the only one interested in the contest. There was a certain rivalry brewing between him and another student at school, Jacob, who had a reputation for being the golden boy when it came to art. Jacob was popular, talented, and confident, a stark contrast to Ethan's quiet and reserved nature. Everyone in their school knew Jacob's name, and he had already won several local art competitions. His paintings were known to be flawless, his technique precise, and his style admired by many. The whispers around school often hinted that Jacob had a secret, that his father, a renowned art collector, had connections in the art world that could help him win any competition he entered. Though no one ever said it out loud, the suspicion was there, that Jacob's success wasn't just a product of his talent, but of his family's influence. Ethan couldn't help but feel that Jacob's name on the contest entry list could ruin his chances. After all, how could he possibly stand out next to someone with such an established reputation? But as the days passed, Ethan reminded himself that it wasn't about winning for the sake of proving others wrong. It was about doing what he loved and following his passion. Still, The thought of Jacob's polished, professional-looking entries gnawed at him. Could he really compete with that? Or was this just another of his wild dreams that would never come to fruition? As Ethan worked through the long nights, he noticed something strange. A few days after he submitted his contest entry, he started receiving anonymous messages on his phone. At first, they were nothing but random comments, praise, criticism, and everything in between. Some of the messages were kind, others harsh and mocking. But as the days went on, the tone of the messages started to change. Someone, it seemed, had taken a particular interest in Ethan's art. The messages were no longer about his work itself, but about his life, about his classmates, his struggles, and even his family. It felt like someone was watching him, learning about him from afar. The strange messages were unsettling, and though Ethan didn't know who was behind them, they added an extra layer of anxiety to his already frazzled mind. Could it be Jacob trying to throw him off his game? Or was it someone else, someone who saw Ethan as a threat to their own success? The feeling of being constantly watched, of not knowing who to trust, weighed heavily on him. And as the days passed, the messages became more intense, almost as if the sender knew exactly how to push Ethan's buttons. One night, after another barrage of cryptic texts, Ethan received one that stood out. It was a simple line, "I know what you're hiding." What was he hiding? Ethan sat frozen, staring at the screen. He couldn't think of anything that would explain such a message. Sure, he had his doubts about his art, about whether anyone could truly appreciate what he was doing, but he hadn't told anyone about his insecurities. Had someone been watching him even before the contest? Was it possible that someone in his own school knew him better than he knew himself? The thought sent chills down his spine, but as much as he tried to brush it off, the unease lingered. It wasn't just the anonymous messages that were unsettling. Ethan had a nagging feeling that there was something more at play. His mind kept going back to Jacob. The way he'd looked at Ethan when he first entered the contest, like he didn't even belong in the same category. It was that same, dismissive glance that Jacob had been giving him for months. Was it jealousy? Or something deeper? Ethan couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he began to suspect that Jacob wasn't the only one who had been keeping an eye on him. Someone else, someone from his past, had returned to town, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they had something to do with the contest. But who? And what exactly did they want from him? As the contest neared its final stage, Ethan's mind was in turmoil. The messages, the rivalry with Jacob, the feeling that something wasn't right, it was all too much. But just as he thought he was about to unravel the mystery, something completely unexpected happened. A new twist emerged, one that would change everything for Ethan. The very thing that he had feared most, the thing that had been hanging over his head from the very beginning, came to light in the most shocking way possible. The truth, when it was revealed, left everyone stunned, and no one was prepared for the consequences. So, as the tension mounted and Ethan's nerves reached their breaking point, one question remained. Would Ethan be able to overcome the forces working against him? Or would he be just another story of potential loss to the shadows? Stick around, because the answers you've been waiting for are coming soon, and they might just surprise you in ways you never saw coming. The closer Ethan got to uncovering the truth, the more obstacles seemed to appear in his path. Just when he thought he had figured out the mystery, something always happened to throw him off course, pushing him further into confusion and doubt. The first real sign that things weren't as simple as they seemed came when a key piece of evidence, something he had relied on for weeks, mysteriously disappeared. It was a document, a printout of the contest rules and the names of the judges. Ethan had kept it in his room, tucked away in a drawer he hadn't opened in days. But when he went to retrieve it one evening, it was gone. No trace of it remained. His heart pounded in his chest as he searched frantically through his room. Could someone have taken it? Or had he misplaced it? The logical part of him told him he was just being paranoid, but deep down, a gnawing feeling told him that someone was actively trying to stop him from finding out the truth. This wasn't the only strange thing that had been happening lately. The anonymous messages had continued, growing more frequent and more threatening. It wasn't just about his art anymore. The messages started to reference things only Ethan would know. Places he'd been, people he'd spoken to, and conversations that seemed too personal for someone who was supposedly just a stranger. Whoever was behind the messages had access to his life in a way that made him uncomfortable. But what made it worse was that no one seemed to take him seriously. His parents dismissed it as typical teenage drama, his friends brushed it off as just some prank, and even his teachers seemed indifferent. The more Ethan tried to tell them, the more they told him to ignore it. "It's just part of growing up," his mom had said, trying to comfort him. "You're just sensitive." But Ethan knew better. Something was wrong, and it was getting worse by the day. Then came the warning. One afternoon, as Ethan sat in the school library, scrolling through his phone, trying to piece together the clues he had gathered so far, he felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Jacob, the last person Ethan expected to approach him, especially after their tense rivalry over the art contest. Jacob leaned in close, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but I suggest you stop digging." Ethan froze, his pulse quickening. Was Jacob behind all of this? The sudden warning felt like more than just a casual threat. Jacob wasn't the type to give unsolicited advice, especially not in such a cryptic way. His eyes flicked around the library, making sure no one was listening before he spoke again. "Trust me, you don't want to find out what's really going on here. Just forget about the contest. It's not worth it." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the warning that troubled him, it was the strange look in Jacob's eyes. There was something dark behind them, something that made Ethan question everything he thought he knew about the boy. Jacob was not acting like himself. But why would he warn Ethan to stop? Was it out of guilt? Or was Jacob trying to protect something or someone else? It didn't make sense, and that only made Ethan more determined to find out the truth. Ethan's instincts told him that Jacob was hiding something, but it wasn't just him. As he dug deeper, a pattern started to emerge, a series of events that seemed too neatly connected to be coincidental. The contest, the messages, the missing evidence. Everything seemed tied to a secret that no one wanted to acknowledge. The more Ethan uncovered, the more he realized that someone was willing to go to great lengths to keep him from learning the truth. But who?
And why?
That's when he stumbled upon something he never expected, a hidden betrayal from someone he'd never suspect. It was a name that Ethan had heard in passing but never thought much about. Mrs. Allen. She was an art teacher at his school, quiet and unassuming, with a kind smile and a gentle demeanor. She had always been supportive of Ethan's art, even when others weren't. But there was something off about her lately. Ethan had noticed her acting strange in the days leading up to the contest. Her attention seemed too focused on him, and her words, though always encouraging, carried an undercurrent of urgency. She'd often tell him, "Don't let anyone tell you that you're not good enough. You have real talent." But there was always a hesitation in her voice, like she was trying to hide something behind the compliment. Ethan couldn't put his finger on it, but something about her was starting to feel wrong. It wasn't until Ethan went back to the art room late one evening, trying to find more information about the contest, that he made a discovery that would turn everything upside down. While rummaging through the storage cabinet in the corner of the room, he found an old file, tucked away behind some unused canvases. The file contained a series of photographs and documents that seemed out of place. One of the photographs was of a younger Mrs. Allen, standing next to a well-dressed man in a suit, shaking hands in front of an impressive art gallery. The man's face was familiar, but Ethan couldn't quite place him. As he flipped through the documents, his heart sank. They were related to an art competition from years ago, a competition that had been surrounded by controversy. The contest had been criticized for its lack of transparency and the apparent favoritism shown towards certain participants. Mrs. Allen's name was mentioned repeatedly, as well as the name of the man in the photograph, Jacob's father. The realization hit Ethan like a ton of bricks. Mrs. Allen had been involved in the same shady art world that Ethan had feared. She wasn't just a teacher. She was connected to Jacob's father, the very man who was rumored to have manipulated the outcome of countless art contests. Was it possible that Mrs. Allen had been helping Jacob all along, using her position to make sure he won no matter what? Ethan's mind raced. Had she been the one behind the messages? Was she the one who had taken the contest rules from his room? And why hadn't she told him the truth? Before he could dig any further, the door to the art room creaked open and Ethan froze. He quickly shoved the file back into the cabinet, but it was too late. Mrs. Allen was standing in the doorway, her face unreadable. "What are you doing here, Ethan?" she asked softly, her voice calm but with an edge of something darker beneath it. Ethan's heart raced as he stood there, caught in the act of uncovering something that could destroy everything. He knew in that moment that the truth was closer than ever, but so was danger. As Mrs. Allen stepped closer, the tension in the room was palpable. Was she about to reveal the truth? Or was she about to stop him from going any further? Ethan couldn't tell. But one thing was certain. He was standing on the edge of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. What happened next could change his life forever. Ethan barely had a chance to react before Mrs. Allen closed the door behind her, stepping into the room with a deliberate slowness that sent a chill down his spine. He could feel his heart racing, his throat tightening, as her eyes locked onto his. It was as if she could see straight through him, as though she knew exactly what he had been up to. The silence in the room hung thick, the weight of her gaze suffocating. "What are you really looking for, Ethan?" she asked, her voice no longer the gentle tone of a supportive teacher, but something colder, more calculating. "Do you really think you can expose what's been hidden for so long?" The words caught him off guard, his mind scrambling to make sense of what was happening. How could she know? He had been so careful, so sure that his investigation had been unnoticed. But now, standing before him, Mrs. Allen seemed to know more than she should, more than Ethan was ready to confront. The tension was unbearable, each passing second feeling like an eternity. Ethan wanted to speak, to deny everything, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say? What could he do? Was he in too deep now, with no way out? Just as he opened his mouth to respond, a sudden sound from behind the door startled them both. Someone was outside, lurking in the hallway. The door handle rattled, and without thinking, Mrs. Allen moved swiftly to block it, her eyes narrowing. "Not a word," she hissed, her hand raised in a warning that sent a chill down his spine. "Stay quiet, and this all goes away. Understand?" Her voice was low, dangerously calm. It was clear she was no longer the kind-hearted teacher Ethan had once thought she was. She had turned into something else, someone with far too much power and far too many secrets to protect. Ethan barely nodded, but the fear was creeping in now, not just because of Mrs. Allen's threatening presence, but because something else was coming into focus. This was bigger than he had realized. As Mrs. Allen shifted her stance, Ethan's mind raced to piece together the fragments of the puzzle. It wasn't just her connection to Jacob's father, to the art world that had been so shady in the past. There was something more, something he had missed until now. Mrs. Allen wasn't just protecting Jacob. She was involved in a larger web of deceit that stretched far beyond the contest. But who else was part of this web? Who else had something to hide? And then, just as he thought things couldn't get any more complicated, another twist came crashing into his life, one that sent everything he had believed into chaos. That night, after the confrontation with Mrs. Allen, Ethan went home feeling more isolated than ever. He had no answers, no direction, just a million questions swirling in his mind. But as he walked into his room, ready to collapse into bed and forget about the madness for a few hours, his phone buzzed with a new notification. Another message. This time, though, it wasn't from the mysterious sender that had been harassing him for weeks. It was from his best friend, Liam. Liam was someone Ethan had always trusted, the kind of friend who would never keep secrets from him. At least, that's what Ethan had always believed. The message was short, simple, and to the point. "We need to talk. I know what you're doing." Ethan's blood ran cold as he read the words over and over again. How could Liam know? Had he been watching Ethan too? The thought of his closest friend being somehow involved in this mess sent a shiver down his spine. The feeling of betrayal washed over him, but he knew he couldn't ignore it. He had to meet Liam, figure out what he knew, what he was hiding. So, without wasting another second, Ethan texted back, arranging to meet him at their usual spot, the quiet park near their school, the place where they had spent countless hours talking about everything and nothing. When Ethan arrived at the park, the last rays of daylight fading into the dark, he spotted Liam sitting on one of the benches. His posture was rigid, his face drawn in a way that Ethan had never seen before. There was something different about him, something off. As Ethan walked closer, Liam didn't greet him with the usual smile. Instead, he just looked at him with an unreadable expression, as though he were still debating whether or not to speak. "Ethan," Liam began, his voice low, his eyes flicking nervously to the side, "you don't know what you're getting yourself into." There was a heaviness in his words, as though he had been carrying a burden for far too long, one that he wasn't sure he could carry any longer. The way Liam was acting made Ethan's stomach drop. This wasn't the Liam he knew. This wasn't his friend. This was someone who was clearly hiding something, someone who knew more than he was letting on. "What do you mean? What's going on? You know what's been happening, don't you?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice steady, trying to push through the sudden feeling of unease that was creeping up on him. Liam hesitated, his hands fidgeting in his lap, before he finally spoke again, his voice shaking. "It's not just Jacob and Mrs. Allen. There's more to it than that. Someone is pulling the strings. Someone you never thought would be involved. Someone close to you." His words were like a punch to the gut. Ethan stared at him, trying to process what he had just said. Who was Liam talking about? Who else could be involved? Before Ethan could ask more questions, Liam stood up quickly, his eyes darting around the park, as if he were expecting someone to be watching them. "You need to stop. Stop looking into the contest. Stop looking into Jacob, stop looking into Mrs. Allen. You have no idea what they're capable of," he said, his voice now frantic. But it wasn't just the warning that caught Ethan off guard, it was the look in Liam's eyes. There was fear there, real fear. As if Liam knew exactly what would happen if Ethan didn't listen, as if there were consequences that neither of them could escape. Ethan's mind was spinning, his thoughts racing faster than he could process. What did Liam know? Why was he so afraid? What had Ethan missed? And who was this new, mysterious figure? This person close to him, who had been pulling the strings all along. The pieces of the puzzle were slipping through his fingers, and the more he tried to hold onto them, the more chaotic it became. As the night settled into an eerie quiet, Ethan stood there in the park, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. He wanted to ask Liam everything, to demand answers, but Liam was already walking away, disappearing into the darkness, leaving Ethan with more questions than ever before. The stakes had never been higher. Ethan had no idea who to trust, who to turn to, or even who was behind this twisted web. But one thing was clear, he was no longer just fighting for the truth. He was fighting to survive the consequences of uncovering it. The following days were a blur of anxiety and confusion for Ethan. Every time he left his house, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him, that eyes were tracking his every move. It wasn't just the fleeting glance of someone passing by, it was the unmistakable sense of being followed. He couldn't pinpoint who it was, there were no obvious shadows lurking in the distance, no cars trailing behind him down empty streets, but the feeling never went away. It gnawed at him constantly, pulling his thoughts into darker corners. He found himself checking over his shoulder more than usual, walking faster, avoiding certain places he used to go. Every noise at night, every shift of the wind, sent his heart racing. He began to wonder if the messages, the strange encounters, and even his recent conversation with Liam were all just the beginning of something much bigger. Something he didn't fully understand. The sense of paranoia grew stronger when, one evening, as Ethan was heading home from a meeting with his art teacher, Mrs. Allen, he noticed something odd. His phone buzzed with a new notification, and for a brief moment, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it was Liam. Maybe he'd finally decided to tell him everything. But when he checked the message, his stomach dropped. It was an image, a photo of Ethan walking down the street earlier that day. It wasn't blurry or taken from a distance. It was clear, close up, and someone had captured him without him even realizing. There was no note, no explanation, just the photo. The words beneath it were simple but chilling. "You're next." A cold sweat broke out across his body as the message sank in. The timing of it couldn't have been a coincidence. He had never seen that person, never sensed anyone nearby when he had walked down the street, yet somehow, someone had gotten so close to him that they could snap a perfect picture. Ethan's world seemed to close in on him. The people around him, the friends he had trusted, the teachers he had confided in, all of them seemed to have vanished from his mind. Was someone he knew behind this? Could Liam have been involved all along? His thoughts spun in an endless loop of suspicion and fear. But one thing was certain now. He was no longer safe. It didn't end there. The next day at school, Ethan noticed something even more unsettling. As he sat in his usual seat at the back of the classroom, trying to focus on the lesson in front of him, he caught a glimpse of something strange out of the corner of his eye. A figure in the hallway just standing there, watching him through the glass window of the door. It wasn't someone he recognized, just a vague silhouette. But when Ethan turned his gaze toward it, the figure quickly turned and disappeared around the corner, almost as if they had been waiting for him to notice. His heart skipped a beat as the adrenaline shot through his veins. Could it be the same person who had sent him the message? Was it someone connected to Jacob's family? Or worse, was it someone he had trusted too much? A shiver ran down his spine, and for the rest of the class, he couldn't concentrate. He kept glancing nervously toward the door, afraid to look too long in case the figure returned. The suspicion gnawed at him, but there was nothing he could do to prove it. He couldn't just confront everyone. He couldn't accuse Liam, not after the cryptic conversation they had had. He couldn't accuse Mrs. Allen, not when she had been the only one who had supported his art in a way that felt genuine. But someone had to be behind all of this, and Ethan's gut told him that the web was far more tangled than he had ever imagined. It was a feeling that settled deep within him, a heavy weight on his chest that only seemed to grow with each passing moment. His mind raced with possibilities, each darker than the last, but he couldn't focus on anything but the overwhelming sense of danger closing in on him. Later that afternoon, things took an even more drastic turn. As Ethan made his way to his car after school, he received another message, this one even more direct and terrifying than the last. It was a voice message this time, and when he pressed play, a familiar voice echoed through the phone's speaker. It was Liam's voice, but it was distorted, warped, as though someone was trying to hide the true identity of the speaker. "You need to stop. Now." The voice was frantic, desperate. "This is bigger than you think. It's not just about the contest. They're watching you. They're going to hurt you if you keep digging." The message cut off abruptly, leaving Ethan in a state of confusion and dread. Was Liam trying to warn him? Or had he been coerced into sending the message by someone else? Ethan's pulse raced as the paranoia took hold again, his thoughts a whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. Who was behind the distorted voice? Was someone forcing Liam to act against his will? Or had his best friend become one of the very people trying to stop him? As he stood frozen in the parking lot, Ethan's phone slipped from his hand, clattering to the ground. He stared at it in shock, his mind struggling to process what was happening. But before he could pick it up, a dark figure stepped out from behind one of the parked cars. Ethan's heart lurched in his chest, his eyes widening in recognition. It was Jacob. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him, shadowed in the dimming light of the afternoon, was a tall man wearing a black hoodie. The man's face was hidden, but the sinister aura surrounding him sent a chill through Ethan's entire body. Jacob's eyes were cold, void of the familiar friendship that Ethan had once thought they shared. He stepped closer, his gaze hard, and spoke in a low, controlled tone. "You don't get it, do you? There's no turning back now. You should have stopped when you had the chance." Ethan's mind raced. What was going on? Why was Jacob so angry? Why was this man with him? Was this the person who had been following him, sending him the threats? The questions seemed endless, but as Jacob's words sunk in, one undeniable truth hit Ethan. He was in serious danger. Whoever was behind this, whoever had been pulling the strings all along, wasn't going to let him walk away. They were going to make sure he didn't expose the truth. The man in the hoodie stepped forward, blocking the path to Ethan's car, his body language stiff and menacing. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but he stood his ground. "What do you want from me? Why are you doing this?" His voice shook, but he refused to back down. Jacob just stared at him, a cruel smile tugging at the corners of his lips. You think you're the only one who has something to lose? You have no idea what's really at stake here. Before Ethan could respond, the man in the hoodie reached out, grabbing his wrist with an unyielding grip. A flash of fear shot through Ethan as he realized just how powerless he was in this moment. But just as quickly as it had started, the moment broke. The man let go of Ethan's wrist, and Jacob stepped back. Consider this a warning, he said, his voice icy. If you keep pushing, we won't be able to protect you anymore. The weight of those words hung in the air like a silent threat, a promise of something far worse if Ethan didn't back off. As the two of them walked away, leaving Ethan standing alone in the parking lot, the reality of his situation hit him with full force. The mystery had grown darker, and the stakes had never been higher. Ethan was no longer just uncovering the truth, he was fighting to survive it. And with every passing day, the danger grew closer. But as much as fear gripped him, one question continued to haunt his thoughts. Who could he trust, and who would be the next to turn on him? As Ethan sat in his room later that night, the tension from the confrontation with Jacob still clung to him like a suffocating cloud. The message, the eerie warning, and the strange figure in the hoodie, everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. His heart still raced every time he thought about what had happened in the parking lot. It was as if the world around him was suddenly full of dangers he never saw coming. But even amid the chaos, something lingered in his mind. Something he couldn't shake. A single detail, a fleeting moment from earlier that day, kept repeating in his thoughts. The message from Liam. The voice, distorted and filled with urgency, had been trying to warn him, but there was something off about it. It hadn't sounded like the Liam he knew. It had sounded like someone was forcing him to speak those words.
But why?
As the minutes ticked by, the weight of that thought bore down on him. His eyes drifted toward the desk where his phone lay, the screen still cracked from the night before. The images and messages he'd received over the past week had felt like pieces of a puzzle, but they didn't fit together, and now it was as if he was missing a key piece. Without realizing it, his hand reached for the phone, the screen flickering to life. His thumb hovered over the notifications, but his gaze froze on something he hadn't noticed before. One of the pictures, the one that had sent a chill down his spine, had a detail he'd overlooked, a reflection in the glass of a store window. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but as he zoomed in, his breath caught in his throat. In the reflection, barely visible, was a man's silhouette. The angle of the shot made it impossible to identify the person, but something about the way the figure stood, with its head slightly tilted, seemed oddly familiar. Ethan's mind raced, but there was something else. The more he stared at the photo, the more he realized that the person in the reflection wasn't just anyone, it was someone he knew. The outline, the posture, even the shape of the coat. It was impossible to mistake. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. It was Mrs. Allen, his art teacher. She was the one in the reflection.
But why?
Why would she be following him? Why would she be involved in this, especially after everything she had done for him? Ethan felt the room spin as the sudden weight of the revelation knocked the breath from his lungs. The woman he had trusted, the one who had encouraged his art, who had seemed like a mentor and protector, was somehow tangled in this mess. It didn't make sense. Why would she send him these cryptic threats? Why would she be in on something that seemed so dangerous? Everything he thought he knew about his situation, about the people around him, was being turned on its head. Mrs. Allen was the last person he would have suspected. But now that the seed of doubt had been planted, Ethan couldn't ignore it. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that she had always been around when the mysterious messages began. Whenever something strange happened, she was there. She had even been the one to suggest he enter that contest in the first place, pushing him to believe in his art and telling him it could change his life. But what if it wasn't just about the contest? What if it was about something else entirely? Something far more sinister. The next day, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking through a maze of lies. Everything around him seemed designed to keep him in the dark. He tried to think back to his last conversation with Mrs. Allen. It had been just a few days before the messages had started, and she had been unusually insistent on him pursuing the contest, almost as if she knew it would change the course of everything. He replayed her words in his mind, searching for anything that might have seemed off. It was then that he remembered something odd. She had mentioned that there were other people who could help him, people who understood the true nature of his talent. The way she had said it, almost cryptically, had made him feel uneasy at the time, but he hadn't thought much of it. But now, in light of the new discovery, it all clicked into place. Mrs. Allen had been trying to guide him towards someone. It wasn't just about winning a contest. She had been grooming him for something bigger, something he hadn't fully understood. And Liam? Was he just a pawn in all of this? Had he been dragged into whatever dark scheme was unfolding around Ethan? The confusion swirling in his mind only deepened. He couldn't tell if Liam had been an unwilling participant or if he had been manipulating Ethan all along. But one thing was certain. Everything was connected, and it was all coming to a head. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted when his phone buzzed again, this time with a new message. His hands shook as he unlocked the screen, and his stomach dropped when he saw who it was from: Liam. But the message wasn't what he expected. It wasn't a warning or a cryptic clue. It was a simple sentence. Meet me at the old park, 8 p.m. Don't bring anyone. No explanation. No context. Just the invitation. Ethan's heart raced as he processed the words. Was this a trap? Was Liam trying to get him to meet someone? Maybe even Mrs. Allen? The possibility made his skin crawl. But despite the fear gnawing at him, he knew he couldn't turn back now. The truth was out there, hidden behind the lies and shadows, and he was getting closer to it. But what if the truth was darker than he could ever imagine? What if the person who had been guiding him, the person he had trusted, wasn't trying to help him at all? As the hours dragged on, Ethan found himself torn between fear and curiosity, caught in a web of deception that seemed to be closing in tighter with every passing minute. The night was creeping closer, and with it, the promise of answers, or perhaps something far more dangerous. His thoughts were a blur as he left his house, the cool air biting at his skin, the silence around him making every footstep feel like a ticking clock. He had no idea what awaited him at the park, but one thing was clear. Whoever had been orchestrating this whole nightmare was about to make their next move, and Ethan wasn't sure if he was ready for what that would mean. Ethan arrived at the old park just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the deserted swings and rusting jungle gyms. The air was thick with tension, as if the night itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. His pulse was racing, each step feeling heavier than the last. What had started as a simple mystery had spiraled into something far more dangerous, and now he was standing at the center of it, unsure of what to do next. He kept replaying the message in his head. Don't bring anyone. He had come alone, but doubt gnawed at him. Was this a trap? Was he walking into something much worse than he could have imagined? His mind kept drifting back to Liam. The messages, the warnings, the strange way his friend had acted. None of it made sense. Ethan had always believed in their friendship, had trusted Liam in ways he'd never trusted anyone else. But now, with every new revelation, Ethan began to wonder if that trust had been misplaced. What if Liam wasn't the ally he thought he was? What if he had been part of this from the start, drawing Ethan deeper into a web of lies and manipulation? The thought made him sick, and yet he couldn't shake it. Everything about this situation was wrong, and now it seemed as though he had reached a crossroads. As he stepped deeper into the park, his eyes scanned the shadows, looking for any sign of movement. It was eerily quiet, the only sounds the distant rustling of leaves and the occasional creak of metal from the old playground equipment. The feeling of being watched crept over him, a shiver running down his spine. He had to make a decision, and he had to make it now. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. He fumbled for it, his hands trembling as he read the new message. It was from an unknown number. I know what you're doing, Ethan. You're too close. You have a choice to make. Come find the truth, but be prepared to lose everything. Or leave it alone, walk away, and never look back. Your call. The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. It was as if the message was designed to push him to the brink, forcing him to make an impossible choice. Was it a threat? A warning? Or was this just another twisted part of whatever game was being played with him? The weight of the decision hung over him like a storm cloud. Could he really turn back? Was there any way to walk away from all of this without feeling like he had betrayed himself? And what if walking away meant letting down the one person he had trusted most, Liam? The more Ethan thought about it, the more he realized how deeply he was entangled in this. This wasn't just about a contest anymore. It wasn't about art or the strange messages that had started this whole ordeal. It was about trust, betrayal, and the harsh reality of the choices we make when we're faced with impossible situations. And in that moment, standing alone in the dark, Ethan knew there was no turning back. The stakes were too high. But then, as if to further complicate things, Ethan heard a voice from behind him. His heart skipped a beat. "You shouldn't have come here alone." He spun around, his eyes narrowing as he saw who it was. Mrs. Allen, the woman who had been a mentor to him, the one who had seemed to care about his future more than anyone else. But now, with the truth threatening to unravel everything, he wasn't so sure. She stepped forward slowly, her face unreadable, but there was a coldness in her eyes that he had never seen before. She was no longer the woman he had trusted with his art. She was someone else entirely. Why? Ethan's voice was barely a whisper, but it was enough to carry the weight of all his questions. Why all of this? What's going on? Mrs. Allen didn't answer immediately. She just stared at him for a long moment, and in that silence, Ethan felt the fear creeping back into his bones. He wanted to trust her, to believe that there was a good explanation for all of this, but the truth was starting to feel like something far more sinister. "You don't understand," she finally said, her voice low and filled with something that almost sounded like regret. "You think you're trying to uncover the truth, but you have no idea what you're really dealing with." Ethan's chest tightened. "Then tell me. Please. I need to know." She shook her head. "I can't. I'm not allowed to." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything felt impossible. "But you're right about one thing," she continued, her gaze softening for just a second. "You're too close now. There's no turning back for you anymore. I warned you before, but you didn't listen. And now you've put yourself in a position where you'll have to choose. Do you want the truth, Ethan? Really? Because if you do, you have to be willing to lose everything. Your art. Your life as you know it. Everything." Ethan's heart raced, his thoughts spinning. Everything he thought he knew, everything he had built his life on, was being ripped away in front of him. The idea of giving up his art, the one thing that had ever felt truly his, was too much to bear. But the alternative, walking away, meant letting the truth slip through his fingers. It felt like a betrayal, and that was something Ethan couldn't do. Not to himself. "I can't just walk away," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "I need to know what's really happening. I can't let you control this anymore." Her expression hardened, and for a brief second, Ethan thought he saw a flicker of something like fear in her eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by a cold resolve. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice tight. "But if you're determined, then there's no turning back now. Just remember, you asked for this. And once you know the truth, you'll wish you hadn't." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing alone in the park, his heart pounding in his chest, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a leaden cloud. The words echoed in his mind. "You'll wish you hadn't." The message was clear, but it only raised more questions. What was the truth? What had he gotten himself into? And more importantly, who could he trust now? The shadows around him seemed to grow deeper, as if the park itself was closing in, leaving Ethan to face the terrifying reality that no matter what choice he made, he was already too far gone. The truth was out there, but the cost of finding it might just be more than he was willing to pay. It all came crashing down in a way Ethan never saw coming. What began as whispers in the shadows, half-truths tucked between fading pages and vague messages, suddenly exploded into something far more organized, far more threatening. The moment he stepped foot into the city's archive building, armed only with a scribbled address from the back of one of Liam's discarded sketchbooks. He felt it. A heavy presence in the air, a chill that warned him he was somewhere he didn't belong. And yet, it wasn't just fear that gripped him. It was purpose. Ethan knew that whatever lay ahead, this was the turning point. This was where it would all either make sense or fall apart completely. He made his way past the security desk using an old ID badge he had found hidden in Mrs. Allen's locked drawer, a badge that shouldn't have existed under a name that didn't match her own. It was the first solid proof he had that she had a double life, one connected to something far beyond the walls of their school. Inside the dark back room lined with old file cabinets and rusted drawers, Ethan found them. Stacks of sealed documents, reports stamped with government seals, surveillance logs, and most disturbingly, student files marked with red tags. His own name was there. Liam's was too. And dozens more, students from other schools across the country, all listed under a program Ethan had never heard of before. Project Helix. His hands trembled as he read the summary page. These weren't just art contests. These weren't just scholarships. This was a systematic talent extraction program, masked as national creative competitions. They had been watching him and others like him from the very beginning, not to support them, but to find the few who could create images that triggered deep neurological responses. Ethan's gift wasn't just artistic, it was cognitive, psychological. Something in his drawings could unlock memory, perception, even suggestion. His success wasn't an accident. It had been orchestrated. And just when he thought he had a grasp on how deep this went, the worst blow of all hit him like a freight train. He found a file labeled Subject Prime, Liam Roth. Unlike the others, Liam's file was thick, filled with heavily redacted pages, incident reports, and an attached letter signed by none other than Mrs. Allen. But it wasn't a letter of concern. It was a recommendation. She had vouched for Liam to become part of the controlling arm of the project, not just a victim of it. According to the file, Liam had joined them willingly 2 years ago, after his first regional art win. He had been helping them select others, Ethan included. It made no sense. The notes described Liam's role as a recruiter, someone who'd build trust with promising students, then lead them into controlled environments where their work could be manipulated, analyzed, and, if necessary, weaponized. Ethan felt sick. His stomach churned at the thought that his closest friend had not only betrayed him but had played a role in bringing so many others into the same trap. Everything, every conversation, every moment of encouragement was tainted now. The things Liam had said that seemed supportive, the advice he'd given, it all came back warped and hollow in hindsight. Ethan bolted out of the archive building and into the night air, gasping like he couldn't breathe. The city lights were too bright, too artificial, and everything felt like it was pressing in on him. He knew he had to get to Liam, but not for comfort or answers. He needed the truth, and he needed it now. The messages, the threats, even Mrs. Allen's warning, they were trying to protect him from going deeper, not because they cared, but because once he knew the full scale of the operation, there would be no way back. By the time Ethan reached Liam's apartment, he was shaking with adrenaline. He didn't knock. He shoved the door open and stepped inside to find Liam sitting calmly at the kitchen table, almost as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. The expression on his face wasn't one of surprise or guilt, it was resignation. Like he had expected the truth to surface eventually. "I didn't want you to find out this way," Liam said, his voice low, no trace of his usual charm. "But you were always the smart one. I told them it wouldn't take long." Ethan stared at him, his jaw tight. "How long have you been part of this?" Liam didn't flinch. "Since the beginning. I thought it was a way out. A way to make sure I didn't end up like everyone else, forgotten, buried in debt, never seen. They promised opportunity, protection, and I believed them." "You used me," Ethan snapped, his voice breaking. "You used everyone." "I saved you," Liam countered, standing now, his tone sharp. "If I hadn't brought you in, someone else would have. You would have been tested without even knowing it. I made sure you were prepared. I gave you control." But Ethan didn't feel in control. He felt like a puppet, his strings pulled by people he thought he knew, playing a part in something monstrous. And now, with everything exposed, he realized it wasn't just about him. This operation had its hands in schools, contests, institutions all across the country. Art wasn't just expression anymore, it was exploitation. Ethan wasn't just a boy with a pencil and imagination. He was a target. And every second he stayed silent, more talented kids were being drawn into the same nightmare. "You're still in it," Ethan said slowly, the weight of the moment settling over him. "You're still working with them." Liam didn't answer right away, but the silence spoke volumes. And then Ethan noticed something else, movement in the reflection of the window behind Liam. Someone else was in the apartment. Watching, listening, maybe recording. Ethan didn't know what would happen next, but he knew this wasn't over. Not even close. The real fight was just beginning. The apartment was dead silent, the kind of silence that settles just before the world decides whether it's going to end in a whisper or a bang. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest, every instinct screaming at him to run, to get out before it was too late. But he stood his ground, refusing to move until he knew everything. Liam's betrayal had gutted him, but now it was more than personal, it was critical. Whoever was in that apartment with them, whoever had been listening from the shadows, wasn't just another pawn in this game. They were the one pulling the strings, and Ethan could feel it. The air was thick with tension, not just between him and Liam, but with something much darker pressing in from the edges of the room. Then she stepped out. Mrs. Allen. Not the panicked, tired teacher he'd seen weeks ago in the art room, but a colder, more calculated version of her. Her posture was straighter, her eyes sharper, and there was no trace of concern left in her face. This wasn't the woman who handed out crayons and quietly encouraged creativity in her classroom. This was someone else entirely. "You were supposed to stop digging, Ethan," she said calmly, like she was disappointed in a student who'd gone too far with an assignment. "You had talent. We were protecting that, guiding it. You were exploiting it," Ethan shot back, his voice hoarse but steady. "You used all of us like lab rats." Mrs. Allen didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward and placed a folder on the table between him and Liam. "You think this is about you," she said. "It never was. You were part of something bigger, something that's been in motion long before you were born. These abilities, this instinct you have to draw what others can't even explain, it's not just talent. It's evolutionary. People like you reshape how others think, how they feel, how they remember. That's not a gift. It's a weapon. And in the wrong hands, it destroys more than it creates." Ethan slowly reached for the folder, flipping it open despite every fiber of his being warning him not to. Inside were photographs. Pages and pages of surveillance shots, biometric scans, and neurological maps from dozens of students across the country, kids just like him, flagged and monitored from childhood. But what stunned him most wasn't what the images showed. It was what they were missing. One profile was blacked out entirely, redacted beyond recognition. Except for one thing, the initials on the last page, ER. His own file. "Why me?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "Why now?" Liam finally spoke, but this time, his voice was raw. "Because you started drawing things that weren't supposed to exist. Symbols that match ones from archived classified intel. Images only seen in places that no one ever came back from. You unlocked something, Ethan. Something no one else has ever been able to put on paper. They wanted to test you. And if they couldn't control you, they'd erase you." Everything spun around him. The National Art Contest, the scouts who discovered him, the sudden interest from top-tier schools. It wasn't about nurturing talent. It was a vetting process. A filter. And Ethan had made it through. But now that he had, they didn't know what to do with him. Because he had drawn something too accurate, something too ancient, and buried for coincidence. But before he could ask what it was, the lights flickered. A siren whined in the distance, then grew louder. Mrs. Allen's eyes snapped to the window. "They're early," she muttered. Liam moved fast, yanking Ethan away from the window as black SUVs rolled to a stop below. Men in unmarked gear were already moving toward the building. Ethan didn't need to be told who they were. These were the same agents who had cleaned up every other loose end, the ones who erased files, relocated families, and silenced threats. And now they were here for him. "Why are you still helping me?" Ethan demanded, turning to Liam. Because I lied, Liam said bitterly. I didn't recruit you. I tried to hide you. I gave them others instead. Kids who didn't draw like you. I thought it would be enough. The betrayal landed like a gut punch. All this time, Liam had been playing both sides, not to protect himself, but to shield Ethan, until it got too big to control. They barely made it out of the apartment, down the fire escape, through alleys, into a side street where a motorcycle waited. One helmet. No backup. Ethan didn't hesitate. He took it and climbed on, while Liam shouted directions. Go to Ridge Hill. There's a safe house in the woods. You'll find answers there. But don't trust what they tell you next. You're not the only one who can draw like that. Ethan sped off into the night, the roar of the engine drowning out the sound of everything he was leaving behind. He didn't look back. He couldn't. But just before he turned the corner, he caught one last glimpse of Liam, arms raised, stepping out in front of the agents, sacrificing himself. When Ethan reached Ridge Hill hours later, the safe house wasn't what he expected. It wasn't a bunker or a lab. It was a cabin. And inside, waiting quietly at the table, was a woman who looked eerily familiar. She introduced herself as Eleanor Roth, Liam's sister. But Liam never told Ethan he had a sister. And on the wall behind her was a canvas, half-finished, but unmistakably Ethan's style. Only he never painted it. And that's when it hit him. Maybe he hadn't been the one drawing those images after all. Maybe someone else had been drawing through him. And now he was about to find out who. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, unable to tear his eyes away from the canvas. It was unmistakably his style. The brushwork, the composition, the strange, swirling symbols that once only poured out of him during his most isolated, trance-like moments. Yet he had never touched that painting. The colors were slightly darker, more mature, more deliberate than anything he had ever created before. It felt like looking into a mirror that reflected a future he hadn't lived yet. Eleanor Roth rose slowly from her chair, her movements calm but measured, as if she'd been rehearsing this moment for years. Her eyes studied him with unsettling familiarity, not with suspicion or fear, but with quiet recognition, the kind that carried the weight of buried history. I was the first, she said softly, her voice carrying a kind of weariness that didn't belong to her years. Before you. Before all the others. They found me when I was 11. My drawings, same symbols, same visions. But I didn't have your restraint. I painted what they told me to paint. And for years, I thought I was doing good. Until I realized they weren't preserving art. They were weaponizing imagination. Ethan sat slowly, the exhaustion from the last few weeks crashing down on him all at once. He listened as Eleanor explained the full scope of the project, a clandestine government initiative masked as educational talent programs, scouting young artists across the country whose creative output mirrored geometric patterns, linguistic codes, and psychic phenomena previously cataloged by deep black agencies. Some of those kids disappeared. Others were used until they burned out. A few vanished from public life entirely, their art and identities erased. Liam had been one of the few operatives who'd gone rogue, trying to shield select kids while feeding the agency decoys. Ethan was his final act of rebellion. And now, it was up to Ethan to decide whether the story ended or continued. They spent days in that cabin, piecing together timelines, decoding archived files Liam had hidden in old canvases and matching their visions against ancient languages and Cold War-era psychic documents. Every answer brought more questions, but they weren't running anymore. For the first time, Ethan was confronting the truth, not as a victim, but as a creator. He began to understand that his drawings weren't just glimpses of some unconscious truth. They were warnings, or invitations, depending on who was interpreting them. The more he painted, the clearer it all became, the same shadowed figure, always watching from just beyond the frame. The same pattern spiraling outward like a galaxy collapsing in on itself. And always that same eerie feeling that someone or something was guiding his hand. It wasn't inspiration. It was memory. But not his. One night, Eleanor brought out a locked box, retrieved from a storage unit tied to one of the original project founders. Inside were dozens of notebooks, all filled with sketches and notes in Liam's handwriting. He had been documenting his efforts to sabotage the program from the inside. But what struck Ethan most was the final entry. It wasn't a plan or a confession. It was a question. What if they're not visions of what will be, but echoes of what's already happened, again and again? Suddenly, everything clicked. The repeating symbols. The paintings that seemed older than they should be. The familiarity he felt when seeing art he'd supposedly never made. It wasn't just psychic intuition or government manipulation. It was something far more terrifying. These weren't just talented kids with a gift. They were conduits. Echoes of past creators. Reincarnations, maybe. Or links in a chain repeating the same patterns throughout time. And Ethan's role? He wasn't the first to fight back. But he might be the last who could. Eventually, the agents stopped searching. The news cycle shifted. The contest faded from the headlines, and the world moved on, as it always does. Ethan returned home under a new name, enrolled in a small community college, and started over. Quietly.
Carefully.
But he never stopped painting. Not for the fame. Not for recognition. But because he knew now that his art wasn't just expression, it was survival. A map. A message. One morning, months later, he received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a sketch pad, yellowed and frayed, with only one message scrawled across the cover in Liam's unmistakable handwriting. You finished what I couldn't. But it's not over. Beneath that, taped to the inside cover, was a photograph. It was grainy and old, showing a group of students in a government facility art lab. Ethan immediately recognized Eleanor as a child. But it was the figure beside her that made him drop the pad. It was him, or someone who looked exactly like him, from decades ago. The weight of the discovery settled in his chest like a stone, but he didn't feel fear. Not anymore. He felt purpose. Destiny, maybe. He didn't have all the answers. And he probably never would. But he finally understood that sometimes the act of creation itself is an act of rebellion. A way of resisting those who try to control the future by rewriting the past. And as Ethan picked up his pencil and began sketching again, he knew someone, somewhere, was watching. But this time, he was ready for them. And maybe, just maybe, they weren't the only ones watching anymore. Because now, so were you.